Coming up on our newscast tonight. Rapid developments are taking place ahead of another historic and unprecedented summit. The two Koreas agreed to hold working-level talks tomorrow, while Pyongyang has already begun the dismantlement of its Punggye-ri nuclear test site. Tokyo once again places unfounded territorial claims on South Korea's Dokdo Island in its diplomatic blue book. Seoul responds by reminding how such misguided move could affect bilateral ties and vowing stern countermeasures. Through an administrative policy speech, South Korean Prime Minister touches on the extra funds needed for the sake of public welfare. He highlights the importance and urgency of passing the bill to enable reforms and job creation. NEWSCENTER begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Che. Tomorrow, high-level delegations of Seoul and Pyongyang will meet for the first time since last month's historic inter-Korean summit. There's a long list of agenda to ensure successful implementation of the Panmunjom declaration agreed by the two leaders. Arirang's Unification Ministry correspondent Oh Jung-hee starts us off.
High-level delegations of the two Koreas are meeting for the first time since the inter-Korean summit held late last month. The meeting is slated to take place on Wednesday at the Peace House on the South Korean side of the border village of Panmunjom.
South and North Korea agreed to hold high-level talks on May 16th at the Peace House in Panmunjom to discuss measures to implement the Panmunjom Declaration.
According to Seoul's Unification Ministry on Tuesday, South Korea proposed to North Korea that they should hold high-level talks on Monday, but North Korea replied Tuesday morning and suggested they meet on Wednesday. Pyongyang's suggestion was accepted by Seoul, and North Korea is sending a 5-member delegation led by Lee Sun-kwon, the head of the North's Inter-Korean Affairs Committee. South Korea's delegation is also 5-membered, led by Unification Minister Cho Myung-kyun. There's a plethora of topics to be discussed by Seoul and Pyongyang. The two sides are expected to try and set dates for inter-Korea military and Red Cross talks, as well as establish dialogue channels for each. Seoul says holding reunions of war-torn families is the top priority. Holding joint events on major dates shared by the two Koreas is also to be discussed. Coming right up is June 15th, on which Seoul and Pyongyang issued the first joint statement in 2000. Meanwhile, inter-Korean economic projects like connecting existing railways between the two Koreas, as well as forming joint teams for upcoming international sports events, could also be on the table, as ministers in charge of railways and sports are included in the North Korean delegation, while Seoul has also confirmed the attendance of vice ministers of land and culture to Wednesday's high-level talks. Forestation projects could be brought up as well, with South Korea's Vice Minister of the Forest Service also taking part in the meeting. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
8 journalists from the nation will be invited to the closure of North Korea's Punggye-ri nuclear test site next week. Seoul's Unification Ministry was informed by Pyongyang that it will allow 4 reporters from a wire news agency and 4 from a television broadcaster to witness the event. After receiving their respective visas from the North Korean embassy in China, the invited members of the press will take a chartered flight from Beijing with other foreign media to the coastal town of Wonsan next Tuesday on May 22nd. They will then be transported by train to Punggye-ri before returning home on either May 26th or May 27th. The regime has begun dismantling its Punggye-ri nuclear test site. According to 38 North, satellite imagery shows several key operational support buildings have been destroyed, while some rails for mining carts seem to have been removed. Other more substantial structures around the facility remain intact, with no tunnel entrances permanently shut down yet. The U.S.-based North Korea monitoring website explains this is to save the complete destruction of the tunnels and the removal of facilities so that foreign journalists can witness those moments next week. During today's regular briefing, Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff said the North appears to be getting ready for the destruction of the nuclear test site and added it is closely monitoring the situation in the area. The head of the World Food Program says Pyongyang is changing, that there's more cooperation and optimism than in the past. His comments came at a press briefing in Seoul following a 4-day trip to the north last week. Park Ji-won shares with us his remarks.
At a press briefing in central Seoul Tuesday afternoon, the World Food Programme's executive director, David Beasley, told reporters about his team's impressions of North Korea based on their 4-day visit to the north last week. His team spent 2 days in Pyongyang, meeting key political figures like North Korea's ceremonial leader Kim Young-nam, and spent the other 2 days visiting villages in the countryside. The WFP chief said he could sense tremendous sense of optimism in the leadership and in the people in one of the most reclusive states in the world, saying they were granted more access and more local cooperation than in past years. He added that although cases of poverty and malnutrition still exist, he didn't see cases of starvation, which he used to witness in the north back in the 1990s.
Going from village to village, while we did not see starvation, there's clearly issues of undernutrition or malnutrition, very little mechanization, very few paved roads. This is springtime. They're planting. I saw men and women out in the fields working, very structured, very organized, every inch of land being utilized, working with oxen and plows, shovels, rakes, hoes, manual labor tools.
The WFP head also said he could feel the changing attitudes of North Korean officials and its people and their yearnings for new opportunities for growth.
What was pleasing was it seemed to be a genuine desire to be more open and more frank and candid discussions.
Regarding South Korea's previous vow to donate some $4.5 million of humanitarian assistance to North Korea through the WFP, the head of the WFP said he doesn't yet to know about the exact timeline of the donation, and he hopes to continue close consultation with the South Korean government. Meanwhile, following the WFP chief's meeting with South Korea's Unification Minister Cho Myung-gyun on Tuesday afternoon, he is also scheduled to meet South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa on Wednesday to discuss humanitarian assistance to North Korea and close mutual consultation on future projects. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Last Wednesday, the U.S. House Armed Services Committee approved a bill that would make sure the American military maintains a robust presence in South Korea. It was introduced by Democrat Ruben Gallego and approved with just one vote against it. If passed by Congress, the bill would require any reduction in U.S. troops to below 22,000 to be certified by the Secretary of Defense, that it would not lower Allied security in the region. Right now, there are some 28,500 American troops in South Korea. In a press release from his office, Gallego said his bill was a move to show allies that Washington is a committed partner in light of greater uncertainty caused by, quote, President Trump and world events. A House vote on the bill is expected soon. The United Nations Secretary-General will sit down for talks with U.S. President Donald Trump on Friday. During the meeting at the White House, the two are expected to discuss a range of global issues, including North Korea. Cha Sang-mi sheds light on what prompted this face-to-face.
U.S. President Trump is to sit down with the head of the UN, Antonio Guterres, in Washington this Friday to discuss global issues, including North Korea. The White House announced Monday local time that the two leaders would talk about the denuclearization of North Korea, the crisis in Syria, and other issues. The two are also expected to discuss UN reform. The statement said that the two leaders will also reaffirm the commitment of the U.S. to the United Nations and to improving the international organization's efficiency and effectiveness. The move is seen as Trump's attempt to boost relations with the UN ahead of the North Korea-U.S. summit next month to help ensure the support of UN bodies like the International Atomic Energy Agency. There's interest over whether Trump and Guterres will talk about easing sanctions on North Korea or Pyongyang to completely dismantle its nuclear programs, a line mentioned by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo during his recent second visit to Pyongyang. Yet some experts say the meeting will rather cover more general issues.
Cooperation is a must with the UN, but when it comes to lifting sanctions on North Korea, the decision is rather made by the United Nations Security Council. It just requires the approval of the 5 members, including the US, China, and Russia.
The expert added that as for the independent U.S.-led sanctions on the regime, it is Washington's choice whether to keep them or not. Also, with some people suggesting Trump is in the running for the Nobel Peace Prize, the expert said it is not much of a surprise that Trump is trying to mend relations with the top international diplomatic organization. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
At the National Assembly, rival parties finally agreed to get things moving. With Parliament set to resume its intended function, the nation's Prime Minister took to the podium to emphasize the importance and urgency of pushing through with the pending supplementary budget bill. Kim Mo-kyun has the highlights from his administrative policy speech.
In order for the support measures on areas prone to restructuring and on youth unemployment to be effective, the National Assembly's approval of the supplementary budget bill is crucial. We ask for you to swiftly pass the bill so that the government can implement it as soon as possible.
During his administrative policy speech on Tuesday, Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun urged the National Assembly to combine forces so that the supplementary budget bill and other bills related to public welfare can be processed quickly and thoroughly. He stressed the need for the bill, which he calls an emergency budget, to be passed in order to help alleviate the nation's record-high unemployment rate. The Prime Minister also said that the bill is also essential for boosting the regional economies suffering from restructuring in the shipbuilding and automaking sectors. At the extraordinary session last month, the government submitted a $3.6 billion extra budget bill, which the parliament agreed on Monday to vote on during a plenary session set for Friday. Aside from the extra budget, the Prime Minister also said that the government is waiting for the Parliament's approval on bills directly related to the lives of the public, such as the revised tax bill and bills on fine dust particles and public security. He vowed to continue efforts to come up with deep-rooted structural measures to boost innovation in the education, labor, and economic sectors. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
In a meeting with top aides, President Moon Jae-in vowed to crack down on sex crimes. According to a statement from the top office, the Liberal leader called for stern punishments for crimes involving hidden cameras, dating abuse, and domestic violence. Emphasizing such heinous acts are absolutely unacceptable and have no place in modern society, he highlighted the need for change in how authorities and the public view and handle such crimes. President Moon's remarks come in the wake of a recent scandal in which a female model illegally posted online photos of her male colleague posing nude at a local university art class, prompting a police investigation. Japan once again declares South Korea's Dokdo is its territory. Tokyo also continues to maintain a lot of controversial and wrongful claims over historic disputes with Seoul. Lee Ji-won explains how such moves are dampening the latest peaceful mood in the region.
Japan has thrown a wet blanket over the recent reconciliatory mood springing up in East Asia. In its annual foreign policy document, the Diplomatic Blue Book, it has once again repeated its false claim to South Korea's easternmost Dokdo Island, saying Dokdo is illegally occupied by South Korea. It was a move that was immediately denounced on Tuesday by Seoul's foreign ministry.
Our government strongly protests against Japan's diplomatic blue book having repeated this claim to South Korea's sovereign territory of Dokdo, and it strongly urges Tokyo to immediately drop the claim.
The spokesperson said Seoul reiterates that the claim is futile and has no impact whatsoever on South Korea's sovereignty over Dokdo, which is justified historically, geographically, and by international law. He also said the claim is unjustified and absurd and warned that it will only hinder the development of Seoul-Tokyo ties. In its Blue Book, Japan also claimed again that the body of water between Japan and Korea should be called the Sea of Japan, a name it said is the only one confirmed internationally. Seoul's foreign ministry called in the deputy chief of mission at the Japanese embassy, Koichi Mizushima, to lodge a formal complaint. The complaint said in particular that Seoul cannot accept the Sea of Japan label, saying it is rightfully called the East Sea, a name that has been used in Korea for over 2,000 years. The Japanese document also urged Seoul to implement the so-called Comfort Women Agreement, reached in 2015, which was meant to provide support for the victims of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. The deal did not take into consideration the opinions of the victims or include an official sincere apology from Japan, and has been neglected for months. While Japan's claims are not new, what's notable this year is that there is much more material related to Dokdo and the Comfort Woman issue compared to last year. It has also deleted a phrase that called South Korea Japan's most important neighbor that shares strategic interests. And doing little to build closer ties with North Korea, the document condemned the regime's nuclear tests and missile launches as severe threats and maintained its hardline stance. Ties between South Korea and Japan seem to be on the mend since their three-way talks with China last week. But observers say Japan's lack of repentance for its past wrongdoings could isolate it further on North Korean issues, especially with even Pyongyang urging Japan to apologize. 이지원, 아리랑 뉴스.
In other parts of our world, the Israeli forces have killed dozens of Palestinians protesting at the Gaza border. The bloody clash comes as the U.S. follows through on last year's controversial statement of recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Arirang has the full story.
Palestinian health officials say 58 people were killed Monday and just under 3,000 others are said to have been injured. The assault came as a U.S. delegation, including President Trump's daughter and son-in-law, was attending a ceremony to officially open the new U.S. embassy to Israel in Jerusalem. The move announced by President Trump last year after recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital has infuriated Palestinians who see East Jerusalem as their capital of a future state. It also drew global criticism for jeopardizing a possible peace deal between the two regional rivals. Palestinians, led by Gaza's Islamist rulers Hamas, have been protesting along the Gaza border for weeks now in what has been dubbed as the Great March of Return. These demonstrations have resulted in casualties, but Monday's incident was the deadliest clash since the 2014 Gaza war. The Palestinian envoy to the UN condemned the Israeli assault and demanded action on the conflict in the West Bank.
These war crimes need to be dealt with by the Security Council and the international appropriate legal system to bring those criminals to justice, because the Palestinian people should not be the exception to the rule.
Other nations, including Britain and France, have called for restraint from the Israelis, while Turkey called it a massacre. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tweeted his military's actions were an act of self-defense of his country's borders. Israel's military claims it was responding to protesters throwing Molotov cocktails, burned tires and stones at Israeli soldiers. The White House also backed his claims by blaming Hamas for the bloodshed.
The responsibility for these tragic deaths rests squarely with Hamas. Hamas is intentionally and cynically provoking this response, and as the Secretary of State said, Israel has the right to defend itself.
Noaram, Arirang News.
Korea's foreign exchange deposits saw a sharp drop in April. The nation's central bank points to the strong U.S. dollar and unusually high FX reserves in previous months as factors driving this trend. Kim Hye-sung breaks down the digits for us.
South Korea's foreign exchange deposits saw the biggest on-month fall in 7 months this April. The Bank of Korea said in a statement Tuesday that foreign currency deposits fell by $3.1 billion on month to $78.2 billion in April. The foreign exchange deposits recorded include those held by Korean citizens, local companies, foreign companies operating in Korea, and foreigners who have lived in the country for more than 6 months. This is the biggest fall since September 2017, when the deposits tumbled by $3.48 billion.
The foreign exchange deposits fell mainly as Korean exporting companies shed their U.S. dollar reserves on the stronger greenback last month. The on-month drop of over $30 billion is not a small figure. But in the past several months, Korea's foreign exchange deposits were unusually high due to the strong Korean won on lower North Korea risk. So in a way, the fall is more like a correction.
The South Korean won weakened against the US dollar, averaging 1,068 won against the greenback in April, up 4.5 won from a month earlier. According to the central bank, deposits in US dollars shrank by $3.7 billion to $66.3 billion in April, accounting for about 85% of the total foreign exchange bank deposits. Deposits dominated in other foreign currencies, including the Japanese yen, the euro, and Chinese yuan, all inched up slightly. 김혜성, Arirang News.
It's Teachers' Day here in Korea. Children and adults alike show appreciation to mentors and educators for their hard work and dedication. The Education Ministry held a special event for a number of teachers invited to the Sejong Convention Center. Students usually present teachers with carnations or other gifts, a tradition that had to be changed as some felt wary of such gestures due to the 2016 anti-graft law. Students are opting for handwritten letters instead. The two Koreas agreed to jointly participate in international sports competitions, including the 2018 Asian Games. But there won't be any extra roster spots when unified squads are formed in August. Won Jong-han outlines the challenges and dilemma that comes as we gear up for more inter-Korean team-ups.
The organizing committee for the 2018 Asian Games will only support joint Korean teams if those teams aren't granted any extra roster spots for athletes. Lee Gi-heung, head of Korea's Sport and Olympic Committee, confirmed the Olympic Council of Asia's roster decision on Monday. The Asian Games organizing committee's decision comes after the joint Korean women's ice hockey team formed for the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympic was allowed to add 12 North Korean players to its original roster of 23 South Korean players. 7 sports federations have expressed an interest in forming a joint Korean team with North Korea for the Asian Games, and basketball is one of those 7 sports. According to the president of South Korean basketball's governing body, the decision was based on a long history of sporting exchanges between the two Koreas.
South Korea has long been in contact with North Korea through basketball. In the early 20th century, there was the Seoul-Pyongyang basketball competition, Korea's biggest sporting rivalry. So because we have that traditional background of sporting exchanges, the KBL has agreed to a certain degree to form a combined Korean team.
Experts see this as a turning point for basketball itself and, of course, for inter-Korean ties.
For the Basketball Association, things like forming a joint team are a chance to boost the sport's popularity. And for the relationship between the two Koreas, it'll cultivate the momentum for peace on the Korean peninsula.
But many experts are concerned that North Korean basketball players are a virtually unknown quantity, having not appeared at any international competition since the Guangzhou Asian Games in 2010. And just like the women's joint ice hockey team at the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, a major drawback will be the unfairness to South Korean basketball players who are cut from the roster to make room for the North Korean athletes. The deadline for the athletes' registration for the Asian Games is at the end of June. And at the moment, the Korean Canoe Federation seems the most likely candidate for forming a joint team, as it won't come at the expense of any athletes, considering neither South nor North Korea have full-time paddlers for the discipline of dragon boat. But the South Korean Olympic Committee is working hard to try and field more than one joint Korean team at the Asian Games. Won Jong-han, Arirang News.
Time to turn to Michelle back at the Weather Center for the updates you'll need. Michelle, today's readings have been the highest so far this year, but it seems like rain is on its way.
Daniel, unlike today's hot, steamy day, there will be showers tomorrow accompanied by thunder and lightning. Now, this is because a warm air front from the south will collide with a cold front coming in from the north, causing atmospheric instability. In particular, until Thursday, the central part of the country will be hit with the most precipitation of up to 120 millimeters, while the southeastern regions will receive the least amount. And tomorrow morning, Seoul will wake up to 20 degrees Celsius and similar readings elsewhere. And the daily highs will rise up high up to 24 degrees in Seoul, while Daegu and Gyeongju will be hit with 25 and 27 degrees, respectively. Tomorrow's rain is going to be continuing for several days, mostly until Friday morning. So then we'll get a favorable weekend and the rain will cool down temperatures, making it optimal. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
This is where we wrap up tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Wherever you may be tuning in from, thank you for staying with us.